It is another wonderful Thursday out there. It's Alexander Keaton, and as always, my Rio Nick Bradshaw. We're here to not play politics today. Of all days, we can't play politics today because of everything that has happened. Nick, how the heck are you?
I'm doing well, and I think along with our listeners tonight, I am going to be just as excited to hear what you have to say. I've taken a little bit of a break over the last couple of days, and I'm going to tell you, I feel better for it. Um, I just, you gotta recalibrate every once in a while. You got to step back and look at pretty art and exercise and go for a nice drive and have a nice meal and talk to family or whatnot. But I just needed to step back. So I'm going to be just as much a spectator tonight as many of our fans.
Well, you know what? So first of all, I agree, and I think that's if there is one message we have here is if you're the reason politics is consumed so much of our lives is because we're actually playing it. It's politics should not take up as much of our time as it does. It really shouldn't. Politics is merely the tool we use to build the house we all live in. That's all it's supposed to be. But we've made this all-consuming game. It is our pastime. Our pastime isn't baseball or football or, God forbid, soccer. It's politics. That's our national pastime. We have to change that perspective. And so taking time for yourself, look, by the way, always look at art. Art makes life worth living. We as human beings, one of the first things we did, one of the things that archaeologists look for as evidence for human presence is artwork. One of the big arguments I've had with people of who are more archaeologically inclined is over whether or not Neanderthal was a human. And one of the key things that everyone, like myself, argues for them being truly human, just different, they just kind of look different, is the presence of artwork. It is part of what we are. So don't let politics consume your life. Go look at good art. Go have yourself an ice cream cone or a cookie. Go for a walk. Go fishing. Go spend time with your loved ones. Don't let the politics get in the way. But when we must deal with politics, and we must from time to time, now is a good time to get involved because the Kraken has not been released per se, but I can hear the chains are rattling. It is what happened with Giuliani and the rest of the attorney team today was amazing. And what's worse is there's stuff that they didn't even get to address that the guys over at Louder with Crowder talked about that I'd never heard. There's so much we're not hearing. The news media has gone out of their way to suppress so much information. It's shocking. It really is terribly shocking. But so let me sum up, I think, the bigger arguments from Giuliani and that whole thing today. Basically comes down to a couple of things. The first part is there were legitimate irregularities on a micro scale, but it was many, many places. We have affidavits talking about this. The lawsuits that are happening right now, everyone seems to forget. The lawsuits, though, are about more systemic issues where it's like, why were these ballots treated this way and these ballots weren't? Like, why were they curing ballots here? There's no function for that. But you didn't cure these ballots. Why is it that these ballots could come in 3 days later, but these ballots had to be in on time? That was creating an imbalance, a systemic bias. That's what the lawsuits are about. The second thing are these weird improprieties where we have, again, more affidavits of people saying, yes, we were all, we saw people being told to backdate envelopes so that they would count for the election. We were told to count certain ballots multiple times. Things where it isn't just that more people voted than were registered because they had same day registration, things like that, but rather that there were whole precincts in which 200% of those eligible to votes did. So let me repeat this. Entire districts in precincts where It's not that more people were registered to vote, meaning no. The number of people eligible to vote, 100% of them didn't do it. They all voted twice, apparently, because it was 200%. But then we get to the really odd things where, like in Georgia, where they claimed that there was a pipe burst, right? But no one seems to have any evidence of anyone going out to fix anything. Or, hey, we're going to stop we're randomly just stopping to count for whatever reason. All these weird places where everything just sort of stopped for a while and then everyone came back and miraculously hundreds of thousands of ballots had shown up. We have people, again, sworn affidavits, meaning that they are willing to testify to the fact that they saw people show up with ballots, stacks and stacks and stacks of ballots. My favorite one was that these ballots were not creased, meaning they had never been folded and put into an envelope. They were just there. They were all for Biden, but they weren't hand filled out. They looked as if they had been printed. They came out of Biden-Harris buses. These were clearly pre-printed forms that were then fed into the machine. This is where the other team comes in and it becomes very, very interesting. This is where the Dominion thing comes in. Apparently, and this is the big takeaway from Rush and a bunch of other people today, was the reason these things occurred was because so many people showed up same day to vote that it actually melted down the Dominion systems, allegedly, Dominion systems pre-programmed algorithm to cheat on behalf of the Biden Biden. It is her claim that Dominion systems, which we know was created basically in Venezuela, that it is their statement, they're a Canadian group, that their executives are on the run, that their offices have moved overnight, that essentially they're trying to escape scrutiny. They have an inside source into Dominion systems that is staying to be able to give evidence as to how the program works, as far as this whole algorithm that changes certain votes every once in a while, kind of a thing. That they can show where the money came from China, Russia, other actors. Certain people from Dominion were high ups were sent to particular cities, and it's in these cities that these mysterious ballots showed up. But that the reason they shut it down, and this is what they are alleging, was that there was so much in-person voting that the algorithm couldn't fake enough ballots, so they had to go and print them. There are allegations of, or not an allegation, but there was one district where you have provisional ballots that were handed out to the tune of 17,000 provisional ballots. Of that 17,000, 15,000 worked this way. I show up to vote. They look at the register. I'm sorry, you've already voted. It says you voted by mail. That's strange. I don't recall voting. They give you a provisional ballot. They say, yes, you voted by absentee. And what's happened is, what the claim is, that people have come in, they don't have ID. They don't have, they're not registered to vote. They simply let them vote on someone random in the book, hoping they don't show up to vote. But when that person did show up to vote, it became the actual person who showed up to vote, it became provisional ID. There was a lot of allegations of impropriety on the small, on the micro, and the much larger macro scale, like the Dominion systems, where it was moving votes from one to another. Let's talk about something Crowder pointed out. And I think this is really indicative of the bigger, broader systemic issues here. He's been spending a lot of time looking at the frauds or the alleged frauds. And one of the things he pointed out today was in Michigan. That if you look at the numbers, you can see what percentage of people voted, right? versus registered voters in these certain precincts in and around, and he focused on the area in and around Detroit because it was a certain class or a bunch of precincts in Detroit where 173,000 ballots showed up overnight one night. Now, he runs through all the districts. The first part, which is in Detroit proper, averaged between 12 and 18, maybe as high as 20% of registered voters show up to vote. Okay? So you could average it out to about 15, but somewhere between 10 and 20% of people from a certain aspect of Detroit showed up who were eligible to vote, who had registered to vote, voted. Okay? Seems pretty consistent. When you go outside of these districts to more Trump heavy areas, it was to the tune of 70 to 80%, and some even over 80% showing up to vote. Okay, no big deal. But then we get back to other areas in and around Detroit where there is zero information on registered voters, meaning those counties officially from the state will say 0 people are registered to vote in those precincts. Of these precincts, 173,000 ballots came. At the end of the day, what we can say is there is sufficient reason between the affidavits of people testifying to wrongdoing, of just things that you can see that says this is a problem. There is something to this. These are not conspiracy theories at this point. Where there is smoke, there is fire. And I'm going to be honest, if we have any more smoke, we're gonna need a barbecue. Because there is stuff everywhere. This is legitimately insane. I can't, like, if you had told me this was the plot of a movie, I would have told you it's unrealistic. But that's what happened today. That's just today.
Well, I mean, and again, it comes down to a lot of moving parts. I think the question a lot of people ask is there not just, was there not, and not just the means, but the method, the motive, the opportunity, the chance to get in there and provide the proof. The argument always was, Trump's going to try to steal the election. He won't accept the results. He'll delegitimize it. And that's where I think some people are going to look at it. I think a lot of it has got to be, evidence has to be airtight. It's got to show that. I do find it interesting that in 2016, the big claim was that it was foreign interference in an election that subverted the legitimacy of an administration. And yet when another side tries to claim that same illegitimacy, it's not even remotely viewed upon. And then, you've got other channels like social media outlets and their CEOs saying, well, they regret that these decisions were made. And I'm like, I disagree with that. I don't think they regret it at all. I think it was a calculated choice. But we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. The way you explain it and the way that the situation's unfolding, we just have to track. Like I was talking with my friends and family about it. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I am a stats and probability person. And so there are a lot of questions that were raised, just commonsensical questions like how did the Biden campaign fare so well in certain elections and certain electorates, and yet so poorly down ticket? Are there that many never Trumpers? I mean, the tens upon millions. I don't know. So we'll see. Again, you've got to get it that you provide enough information that this was also done deliberately, that there was that there was some type of conspiracy, some type of cover-up, some type of crime, so that it can be picked up with an official complaint in a court, as I understand it, not being a lawyer.
Yes. No, that's the thing, right? Everyone said without, well, first of all, or said without without presenting evidence, or said without, it's like, first of all, that little phrase has never been said at all for the last 4 years when it came to the Russia investigation. when there was literally no evidence. But here's the big thing that bothers me is there is evidence for this. People have been pointing it out. The news media has just simply ignored it. Now, everyone's like, well, why doesn't Rudy Giuliani and the rest of the team present all of the evidence right now? Because that's not how that works. You have to, you take it into court. You show your stuff in court. You don't want to lead. You don't want to show everyone what your hand is. That's how you don't give them that kind of time. That's just basic understanding. Secondly, only a few people said that they'd like to be known publicly. And why? And Rudy Giuliani called it out. He goes, because if we were to release all of this information, you would have ne'er-do-wells from the Democrat Party, from the left, harass and come after these human beings, after these people who are just trying to say, hey, I saw something that is not right, both Republican and Democrat. There are Democrats who said, I saw something fishy. And, by the way, one of the I forget the woman who she's in the Flynn case, Sidney Powell. She pointed out it's not just Democrats, for the whole Dominion aspect of this. She called out Republicans for buying their way in. This is not a Republican Democrat thing. This is an establishment versus the people thing. That's what this is. This is the people of this country rose up because they were tired. They are fighting back through the ballots, and they overwhelmed the system. We are literally watching the system as it is. Now, again, can this be proved in a court of law? That's what we will wait to find out. But if you ever hear someone say the phrase, there's no evidence for this, or said without evidence, please understand you are being lied to. The evidence exists. Much of it was presented. We have sworn statements from eyewitnesses who claim to have seen the malfeasance. We have a whistleblower within the Dominion system, within the Dominion corporation, who claims to understand how this worked. The simple fact of the matter is, yeah, there is evidence. Now, does it mean that these things are necessarily true? No, but that's why we have a court to work through these things, to see it, to examine all the evidence closely, to weigh it, to measure it, and then to render a verdict and to render a decision. That's what their role is. But this is the beginning of a much larger fight for whether or not we as Americans have the right to choose our leaders. That's the fight that we're having.
What end goal do you see coming from this? What's the objective?
From which side?
Both.
I would argue that, again, there's a difference between liberal and left. The left has wanted a large, centralized, global government forever, as long as they've been around. This idea of the recreation of the Tower of Babel, one globe under one language, under one government. I think it is their belief that if we could just unify everything under a command and control economy, under a large centralized government, that we can solve all ills. They're looking for a system that brings about utopia. On the other side is everyone else. I believe that those on the other side, those of us who are, if you're listening to us, you probably agree with us more often than you don't. And it doesn't mean that you're conservative or liberal. It just means you believe in freedom. You believe that you have an inalienable right to make decisions about how you live your life. The people who voted for Trump, the reason Trump is fighting, are people who want to be able to make a decision about how they live their life. The end goal here is those on the left are globalists who want to create a large, centralized power source and I mean that metaphorical power, political power, economic power, Humans are of no value in that system. We know this because every large command and control system has utterly failed the citizens. Venezuela, Cuba, Nazi Germany, Soviet Russia, North Korea, many nations all across Africa. Large, centralized governments fail. They always fail. They can't succeed. The ones that work today, the Nordic nations everyone likes to point to, they'll even tell you they're not socialist. They're simply free market capitalists with very robust welfare systems. In many cases, it's actually easier to do business in Poland or in the Nordic countries than it is here in the U.S., even after Trump.
Yeah, I mean the the point and counterpoint that everyone goes down when they talk about socialism, of course, is that if you want this negative one, you step to something like Venezuela, of course. And then if you want this positive model that people want to counter it, that you're right, they always use the Nordic countries. But again, there's a difference between a socialist economy like Venezuela and a market economy that's heavily subsidized through taxes and the state. Also, you've got to remember that the Nordic countries are not only very small in population, they're also very homogeneous. And so you're looking now. Some of that's been changing over the years with regard to restricted, unrestricted immigration and different things that are going on. But again, geographically small, population level small. There's things there. I've had friends that have lived and worked in other countries, and I'm thinking of one friend in particular who worked in Germany and explained several friends actually that lived and worked in Germany and explained what it was like to have a job where you would go home and have maternity leave for X amount of time, which could be a very extensive, up to in excess of a year or so, if not more, if not double that or more than that. And you would go back to your job, and that's where it would be set. And there's some thought that can be picked up on for the family. Different work week schedules and whatnot. So there's some ideas that can be taken there. But you're also looking at standard across the board tax rates that I've heard as high as 55. I cannot independently confirm at this exact moment, but percentages of taxes that are just substantially higher. But then again, there's also the perspective of paying people more for their jobs and what it is that they do. I had a conversation with regard to education and law enforcement that could we model some of the countries that actually pay very competitive salaries for those and then hold the standards at those higher levels for those jobs. So I think it's important that we keep in context how these governments and how these economies work. And just by saying something like, well, high taxes mean socialism, and for free market is purely corrupt, and only America is this dark evil. It does. I mean, it's too much work. I mean, I'm proof of it right now myself. There's more that I could read. There's more that I could know. There's more that I could verify and confirm. But I think at the end of the day, when you look at the overwhelming evidence that is present in some place like Venezuela, one of the richest countries in the world in natural resources, literally driving its economy into the ground, is because those models don't work. And when you don't have a limitless revenue source fueling a system, it collapses. To an earlier show that we had, that I believe the titled, we believe in capitalism because it's the world's greatest redistribution of wealth model in the world. It is. It puts it in the hands of those that are creative, that are hardworking, that are unique, that create something that can be done that wasn't there before, a service, a product, whatever. But I want to take one quick step back to the concept that it's this global power. On the strategic level, perhaps people have that view, and the kind of on the theoretical. I think from the applicable level and from the tactical level of looking at this specific event, what I would say is, what does success look like over the next 90 days to the Trump administration? A recount in these states, and the Supreme Court ruling that the elections need to be tossed out in those states. What does a victory look like? What is mission objective?
That's a great question. I think it is. I think the success is hearing this and is having the evidence presented in court. I have a sneaking suspicion that if these, particularly if the Dominion material is as advertised, if there is an insider who can show that the Dominion systems were designed to move ballots, to move tallies from one to another, that's a part of the system. That's why it was designed. That is how it was used. That it was, and they can show that these ballots, these printed ballots, exist and were brought in. I think you're going to be looking at just a massive. Here's the thing, if it is as advertised and the evidence is compelling, I don't know that we don't have an entirely new. Like I don't know that you could like. This is insane. I mean that's what I'm saying. The level of what this is so bizarre. Like I don't know that you could say, well, hey, let's just get rid of all the ones we don't know or the ones we don't like. How do you do that? Like, I think you do it in some cases, but not all. If there's enough to say, well, hey, we can, if we just get rid of the stuff that we know is absolutely uncertifiable, that may be enough to flip everything so everyone stays happy. But if they can show in court that there was a large, it doesn't even have to be centralized, but rather there was a deliberate plot from external, from foreign nations to corrupt our stuff, our election directly. They show that it happened. Honestly, this begs a lot of questions. This begs a lot of questions going back a while, actually, because a lot of these systems, this system very specifically, is a newer system. It's been around for years, but I mean, it's been the last few years. But a lot of these systems, like, I think if people are going to take a closer look, I would not be surprised if maybe some of these older elections are also looked at and said, hey, we're finding stuff here that's weird too. So over the next 90 days, I think the immediate thing is, by the time either Trump presents things that makes everyone look at the electors and go, guys, we just may need to put this whole thing on hold. Because this is so profoundly corrupt, what we're finding, that I mean, honestly, I couldn't even begin to fathom how this plays out. I think if I'm gun to my head, I think what's going to happen is, if they can show enough where, hey, these ballots here, they're the irregularities. Again, the things that the lawsuits are based off of, which is the irregularities, the last minute changes of the law by judges, things like that, invalidate certain votes, I think Trump wins. That gets us into the next administration. But if then the Dominion stuff can be sort of dealt out over time. If it's not, and the Dominion stuff is what's needed, they just may have to hit, and if it's big enough, they may. I don't know what would happen. Like, I don't even know that there's even a way to say, hey, we postpone who the president gets to be until we can figure this out. It is, what they presented is so mind-bogglingly terrifying that it happened. The only thing that gives me comfort from the physical, right? I'm always comforted by the Lord. I know that He's got His hand in this. I know it's going to be okay no matter what happens. It's all within His plan and His will. But on a material level, the thing that comforts me is that there were so many people willing to come out and say, hey, I saw something weird. I saw something that should not have happened. Enough people have come forward to say that it's undeniable that something had to have occurred. That Republicans and Democrats both came forward. It wasn't just Republicans, but people who were on the left came out and said, hey, you know what? Even if this hurts my guy, we got to be above board. We got to be honest here. We're Americans. We got our vote is precious. It is our voice. If we do not have our voice, we have nothing. The fact that is occurring gives me strength. and encouragement. And let me tell you, come the next election, every if you're in the sound of my voice, you need to sign up to be an elector. You need to grab your neighbors. They need to be signed up to be electors and poll watchers. We can no longer trust the system. We can no longer abdicate our responsibility to the system. You get in there, you hold everyone accountable. You vote for the dog catcher. You know the dog catcher's name. You know your councilman's name. You find out. You go have breakfast where they have breakfast so you can hear them. We have got to get involved. This kind of thing could not. If what was described today actually occurred, then we can no longer trust the large institutions. We need to decentralize everything, because that's why this was actually able to be seen. It was the fact that it was decentralized. We as individual Americans need to have our hand in that cookie jar so we can watch it. Because we cannot trust these large corporations. We cannot trust these large governmental organizations. We can't trust any of them. Our vote is our voice. If we don't have it, we literally do not have our nation. The big takeaway from this is that we have to be involved, regardless of what happens, regardless of whether it goes for Trump or not. We have to be involved. We cannot just say, well, it doesn't matter, I'll let somebody else handle it. No, you handle it. We need to advocate for a change in election laws that forces each precinct to do the counting with paper ballots. We can still do some scanning thing. Like, there can be a way to do that, but what I'm saying is each precinct needs to count it. It needs to keep track of it so that we can, from a precinct level, look at the returns when they're tallied at the state and say, did they get our number right? The fact that when they have gone back on these recounts, remember, from the Florida election, the votes between the counts never changed by more than a few hundred votes. Everyone said that, across the entire state. And no one ever said, or everyone has always said from day one with this whole thing, that when you get these recounts, like Trump is tilting at windmills because you never get a move of more than a few hundred votes either way. We've had in just one county where like 6,000 votes were found. We've had 1,400 found in another county, or maybe no, the 1,400 in another precinct. We are finding thousands of ballots that weren't counted. This is corruption and malfeasance and irregularity on such a catastrophic scale that this is prima facie evidence that we have to bring everything back to the lowest possible level to the voter. Every precinct, we need to be able to count them by hand and count them by computer. We can compare them, and then that number gets sent off. And there's none of this, well, we're going to ship our votes down there. We got to take these votes over here. No, we call them in, and we hold on to them until everything is validated. And from our precinct, we can watch what the state tabulates. We have to watch this like a hawk, because if we allow something like this to happen again, this country is no longer the United States of America. It is an entirely different thing. It is a fraud that will be run by large corporations and intergovernment and international governments. It is that profoundly serious.
Well, I think moving forward, the question that then has to be asked is, when we take on these proactive approaches and we take this ownership of the elections where they need to be, is there time left in this election? And I believe the calendar-wise, yeah. But is there time in the mind of the public? I was speaking with a family member the other day, and we were talking, who's actually a psychologist, and I was mentioning that, given any situation, I think people many times will just look for someone to tell them what the group's going to do. For example, if you've ever gotten together with a group of friends and there's 5, 6, 7, 8 of you, and say, where do we want to go eat? And you bounce off this idea and you bounce off this idea. And after like 5, 10 minutes, you're like, okay, oh my gosh, where are we going? and someone's just like hamburgers, and then you're like, all right, I wanted pizza, but at this point I don't even care. Let's just go get hamburgers. I wonder if the psychology behind this is, start moving, the one administration kind of into place to take over, start pushing the other administration out of the way, or not out of the way, but like, hey, you lost, move on. People have accepted that you've lost, even if you haven't. So that's why the truth may be on one side, but until you can prove it, and that's what's unfortunate, that you have to prove it for someone to believe it, from the perspective of it being the truth. Um, we'll see. So the question is, does the public have an appetite to be dealing with this, or are they at the point that they're just ready to accept hamburgers for dinner?
That's a great question. I don't know. I think when the evidence actually hits the court, if it is as obvious as I think it is, as they claim it will be, if they can produce these ballots that were clearly printed, all for Biden, if they can show hard evidence, forensic evidence about where the money from Russia and China was coming from to influence the election, with Dominion, if they can show the Dominion program actually moving the tallies, if they can do that, and at a certain point, even the news media won't be able to hide that. Then I think there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be angry, and I think they will absolutely fight. I think that'll wake people up. Right now, everyone's burned out. But I think if they can see the evidence, if they can see that they were flat out stolen from, I think that changes the minds of a lot of people. Right now, the thing that we have to remember is that the vast majority of people out there are still getting their news from MSNBC, NBC, ABC, CBS, XYZ, right? They're not even aware of this. They're not even aware of these conversations. In fact, one of the things that bothered me was the Republican canvassers who in Detroit were running around saying, "Hey, we're not going to do this. We're not going to certify this vote." Maybe they're just out in Michigan, and they said, and then they got harassed. They were threatened, and so they certified it under the promise that it was going to be audited. And then they turned and said, "Nope, well, you've certified it. We're not going to bother to audit it anymore." And now they're like, "Nope, we want to take our certification back." The reason they weren't going to certify was because there was an imbalance apparently a very large imbalance between the signatures and the votes. That was an aspect of that I wasn't even aware of. There are so many aspects of this that our media is failing so catastrophically. The vast majority of people, that's where they get their news. So they're not actually getting real information on this. I think that's a big problem. And if the information is presented in court in such a way it's compelling and undeniable, I think that will wake up people and make them go, okay, we stay and we fight until we get that pizza.
Okay.
But I will say this, it does need to be dramatic and it needs to be obvious. Like, this can't be, you can't have the pinup board with the little strings and then, trying to connect people here. You've got to be able to be like Snowden. Boom. Here is your information. Here is watching in real time how these things happen. That's the kind of stuff we're going to need to see. And even then, the media is going to try and hide it. So I don't know. I think it's going to come down to every one of us. Like, when this stuff comes out, this channel and a bunch of others are going to have to make the argument, and then we're going to have to share it. We're going to have to become educated on it. We're going to have to talk to our friends. We're going to have to build this. This fight right now is in the courts. But eventually it's going to come to us. We're going to have to educate our friends, our neighbors, people we don't even know. We have to build a coalition that's willing to fight for this country, because if we fail, there's literally nowhere else to go.
There's always Venezuela.
Yeah, worked out well. Well, you know what? It's great if you want to lose a few pounds and you like the taste of your own pets.
Well, I just think that it's, again, can we? I think people are exhausted. I'll use myself. I'll call myself out on the show tonight. I mean, I've been rather, you know, I, in comparison to normal, there are those listening that would say I sound almost sedated. But I would be remiss if I didn't say I am completely guilty of feeling just a little bit of an exhaustion. Little bit of just needing to step back. Talking to friends, talking to family, talking to people that are like, "What's going on? What's happening? Are we going to do this? Are we going to make up?" And you can already see the new panic point is the Senate now in Georgia, right? They're gonna go for that. AP is now calling Georgia for Biden and doing whatever they need to do on the news piece, um, without sounding as though I'm some jaded '90s teenager who, by the way, was a teenager in the '90s, but not really jaded. Um, I would say when you spoke about the media has failed us. Again, I'm not pushing back on that. I would say, do you think they failed, or do you think that what they did was malfeasant? Of course, but I think, I mean, I think there's certainly a narrative at play that I think they were actively seeking to support. So they failed in their capacity to be truly unbiased and provide an objective perspective. But I don't know that I would say that they failed in what they were attempting to do. So I would add just a little caveat of attempting to do, and not that they were trying to pull an election for Biden so much as they were just trying to constantly highlight the Trump administration as literally the fifth level, the seventh level of Hades.
Which was insane to begin with. Well, so here's the thing. I think, and this is probably a conversation for another time as to what was motivating a lot of people. But I think one of the big things that's motivating Trump hatred, regardless of what side, whether it's from the right or the left, I think one of the big motivating factors was he was a disruptive figure for the establishment. No matter how many ways you slice this pie, that's what he was, and that's what drove them to be, like you said. And it's not necessarily that anyone was ever pro Biden, but rather they were all anti-Trump. Um, I think it's a very valued. I think it's a valuable point. Now, again, I think we can talk, and we can, and probably will talk for much longer about that on another episode. But the simple fact of the matter is, whatever happened today was, if it bears fruit, and if we can see it, this is easily the largest scandal of the 20. This makes there. I don't know that there is a political scandal in the last 200 years that matches what happened. Not the scale, not the intent. This was straight up, and this is. I mean, this is the most crazy thing I've ever heard, and I've heard some crazy things.
I mean, I think Russiagate had a lot of things going on that we saw. I think the concern that people have is that they see these bad actors and then they're caught. They're caught in what they're doing, but then nothing seems to really happen. Peter Strzok is going to teach at Georgetown University. He's
Yeah.
known to have been caught with evidence showing how he was going to that the case against the administration was already dropped, and he was like, no, 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 he's going to keep it. How does some low-level analyst even have that authority? So something to think of, just something to think about.
No, it is, and this is something that people, honestly, if people do not go to jail over this, if people don't, I mean, not just the person on the ground, I mean, actual high level, like this is people whose names we know are going to have to go to jail over this. If this doesn't occur, I don't know. I don't even like to think about what would happen. If I'm sorry, what?
And who do you see going to jail?
Well, I'm not saying necessarily who, but what I'm saying is, for this to have occurred the way that it was laid out, There are going to end up being people in the government and people in public life whose names people would recognize. A lot of them are going to be names no one's ever heard of because they're just enough behind the scenes. But there's going to be people whose names I think we know. I'm not going to say specifically who yet because I don't think we have enough information on that. But I guarantee you, by the time this is done, they're going to have to be names of people we know. If they don't go to prison, this will happen again. This is because the level that they're talking about. This is you can't have congressmen, senators, maybe even people in the media, mayors of cities, uh, not in some way participating in this. I don't think it need to be as centralized as people think it does, but I do think there are bigger names. It looks like there's too many people involved for this to not have big names attached to it.
Okay.
It's sort of like when you're fishing and you catch a fish and you can tell it's big. You may not know what the fish is or exactly how big the fish is, but you know it's a big fish. And sometimes you catch a turtle and you realize it's a turtle by the way it's moving, right? You don't know what kind of turtle or how big the turtle is, but you know it's a turtle. And the other one, you know it's a big fish. This is the way it feels right now. By the feel of this thing, they got something, and there's simply no way big names aren't associated with it. Now, which big names are they? I don't know, but there's no way that there are not people with bigger names who aren't involved. But I'm going to be honest. This is one of those things where if people don't go to jail over this, man, or if even worse, if this is allowed to go through and people can see it, and Biden is still put in office, I honestly don't even want to think about what would happen because I don't think it's going to be pretty. This is if this evidence is as solid as they claim and shows what they claim, for it not to be shut down, for Biden to win, or for people to not big names to go to jail, it would be a complete and total catastrophic collapse in faith of this system.
Well, now it's just time to wait and see, right?
Yep. Well, now it's time to wait and see. Unless if you're listening to me and you saw something, let's say you work the polls, if you saw something, if you know somebody who knows something, get out there, get on the record. We got to stop being scared about this. This is the nation that this is literally the future of this nation that we're talking about here. Now, if you're like me and you didn't see anything, you don't know anything directly, then all we can do is prepare for next time. But what we got to do is this is the next step. You talk to your friends, you talk to your neighbors, you go to your church, you talk to your Lions Club, whatever. You got to get involved. We can't assume that the people who are doing this are trustworthy. We can't. Not at the local level, not at the national level. We got to be in there. We have to hold them accountable, or we are not going to have a future.
And on that note, we'd like to go to our sponsors. Valium, for those times when nothing seems to go right.
Valium. Now there's another solution. Guys, this is not a fun time. But this is one of those times where this is real. Unfortunately, real life isn't always fun. It's not always fun in games. I think the problem is, you know what? If you go get that bump checked when it's small, maybe it's just a biopsy and everything's fine. You wait. You don't want to deal with it. It gets bigger. It changes color. Maybe the next time you go in, it's going to take a heck of a lot more than just a minor biopsy and removal. Our country, if these allegations are true, if the witnesses saw what they saw, this is a big deal. And this didn't happen overnight. This has been happening for a very long time. They just got caught because it was too big not to be. The bright side is that there are men and women who are willing to put their lives and their reputations on the line, both parties, to stand for the right thing and fight for your sacred right to vote. If we get this country back, it's going to be by individuals like you and me simply taking up our responsibilities, holding the leaders on the local level accountable, making certain that they earn our trust and they maintain our trust by doing and proving what they do. We can no longer trust the system per se. We have to be a part of it to see it. We have to validate it. It's like what Reagan said: trust but verify. We have to see it. We gotta watch it go from cow to sausage, right? Or cow to hamburger. I mean, well, hold on. There's like beef sausage, right? Beef rings, beef hot dogs. I'm just saying. I think it still work. Either way, we got to watch it go from cow.
If we had any credibility, it was just that's it.
Just saying. I mean,
the Texas kid asking about whether or not sausages can be made from beef. All right.
I'm just saying.
Just lost these.
Hold on. As a Texas kid, let me assure you, we can make anything from anything. I'm just saying there are beef sausages. The metaphor. I think usually it's beef to hamburger. It's pork goes into sausage, but there's all kinds dude. Have you ever had venison sausage? It is the most amazing thing that has ever been made.
I can't eat Bambi.
What?
No, can't do it.
I'm saddened by this now.
Well, anything
anyway,
off the scary topics we were before. No, look. Here's the thing. I think the Trump administration and the era of this time, whether it's coming to its ending point or whether it's continuing, it awakened a sense of knowledgeable citizenry. It awakened the necessity for the knowledgeable citizen, because it has created an environment that level of accountability has to be present. It has to be. It absolutely has to be. And that's a good thing. Unfortunately, cheaters the only silver lining is they make you pay more attention and learn the rules. But to your point, if that accountability is not held and discriminately, expressed upon those who committed those crimes, then what good is having those laws?
Right.
And that's where people, I think, we run into fear of a loss of faith in the system. So I think that we apply the instruments that you talked about. We have the conversations. We maintain a foundation of knowledgeable citizenry, and we bring ourselves to the point that it's not just about winning and losing, because that doesn't serve the greater good, but rather finding common values and ideals that we strive towards. That's why I think breaking down things like cultural identity and a heritage of being American and how everyone can share in that, respecting the flag, saying the Pledge of Allegiance, carrying out parts of the national anthem, carrying out exercising those things that unite us together, rather than picking every single point and making it a point of contention. So we take what we've learned, we've applied what we've learned, and then we move forward smartly as citizens with one another, with a good intention in our hearts to serve those and to serve each other.
Yeah. Nope. I think that's a great way to end on. You're right. Our voices can be heard, and if they're heard, then maybe there can be brotherhood. Because I think that's the thing. We just want to know that we're being heard, and that the laws are equally distributed and used between people.
Well, and not only that we're heard, but that we're being listened to. They say, don't listen to respond, listen to understand.
Yes. No. Well said. Well said. And on that note, we will bid you good people adieu. And perhaps once we come back next Thursday, something new will have occurred. Maybe the Kraken will already be fully released and destroying some small Grecian city or something. Or maybe the Kraken will be fighting Godzilla. At this point, it's 2020. Who in the world knows? Um, and maybe Nick will have had some venison sausage by then. Nick, say goodnight to the nice people.
Good night, nice people. Stay safe. God bless and look out for one another.
Good night.